On this episode of Turning Point Tactics, I'm going to be talking about the Warhammer community article detailing the changes to the 2025 ITC season, what that means from a competitive player, particularly from a kill team point of view, but it will affect big 40k as well. We'll look at some of the historical issues of what ITC was like previously. We're looking at purely from a competitive standpoint and how it interacted with communities globally, and the event sizes and that sort of stuff, how that's changed and how to potentially maximize your points for the 2025 season as an individual, for your faction or for a team going forwards. All of that to come, and I'll also try and highlight where you can potentially attend some of these events to be able to maximise those points, and how you can plan out your year to make sure that you get the most from it from a kill team perspective, from a competitive perspective, if the ITC is important for you. So stand by for more to come. Hello and welcome to Turning Point Tactics, the competitive kill team 40k podcast and YouTube channel focused on giving you the strategies and tactics to seize initiative every turning point. I'm your host Ryan, and I'm here to give you the tips and tricks to elevate every part of your kill team experience. If you enjoy this content and you want more, you can join our Patreon for as little as £3 a month, where you'll get access to our Discord, patron priority questions, early access to videos including kill team bat reps, faction guides and much more. If that's not for you, you can support just by hitting like, subscribe and sharing these videos amongst the community of kill team enthusiasts local to you. With all that said, let's get into it. So if you haven't seen, on the 21st of February, on Warhammer Community, they released an article detailing the ITC 2025 season and the key changes they're implementing from a competitive point of view, which is good to see. And I think broadly, just to highlight what this is, it's a positive change where they're trying to make sure that they get more representation from the regional level and the lower size events or the mid-size events to make sure that more people are able to be better represented on the ITC ladder. So if you're just here for that, broadly, these are good changes, but I'm going to go into a bit more detail and talk about how it affects you as a competitive player. And if it means something to you and you do care about the ITC and you really want to make sure that you're represented quite highly on that list, how you could potentially strategize your attendance at tournaments to make sure you get the maximum amount of points. So let's start with the first thing that has changed. So historically, the ITC always ran from LVO to LVO, so essentially January to January every year, and it would culminate at the end of the LVO. That's for historical reasons, I think dating back to the way that 40k used to be held and the ITC running LVO and that sort of thing being its premier event. Clearly, there has been some changes over the recent years with the introduction of the Warhammer World Championships, the World Championships of Warhammer, in Atlanta or wherever it ends up being in future. So that's been a quite key change in the scene, and is now being recognised by the ITC, and they want to try and align their process with it. This is actually quite a good change for the majority of competitive players, because a lot of people want to tune in to see the World Championships of Warhammer, and it was a bit odd where you sort of like had the focus and the spotlight on the World Championships, and then LVO happened and everyone was focused on LVO as a tournament, but then on the sort of end of it you had the ITC, but it felt a little bit disconnected because you weren't being recognised necessarily in the same way. So this is potentially a really good opportunity for the global events team to capitalise on what the ITC could be, which is that sort of global ranking, and essentially hand out two sets of awards at the World Championships, right? You can have you won this tournament, but then you can also have you won the global tournament, and you won the ITC on points, which is more of a measure of consistent good performance at large events, is how I would describe the ITC, because essentially it's a points-based system. So the new change is that it's going to be from the 25th of November to 25th of November, I assume, depending upon when the new World Championships of Warhammer will be, or One World Championships, whatever you want to call it. So the first thing is they've decided to backdate all of the events from between the 25th of November and now, such that you get a full 12-month season, because potentially you would have missed out on those events. And this, I think, is the best way to make sure no one is disadvantaged. So if you had a really, really good event in November or December time, well, that's going to count towards your ITC points for the 2025 season. And it also means that there's a higher chance that everyone gets their events in. And I'll talk about that in a bit more as we go through. But yes, you have a full year to accumulate your points from the 20th of November through to whenever the World Championships are in November, which I think this year might be a little bit earlier. They were talking about potentially being around the 8th, 9th, 10th sort of time, but we'll wait and see, because there's a whole bunch of factors that change it, and it's not confirmed yet, so we'll have to wait. One of the benefits I would say about this is if you are trying to schedule your golden ticket events, one of the things I always found quite difficult was the somewhat offset between you could be winning a golden ticket in what felt like an entirely different year to the World Championships event, and if you were just slightly out of time and out of sync, you sort of missed it. So this is probably quite a good way for us to be able to align globally all our events and know that if you're taking part in, say, the January 2025 LVO, that's going to be a ticket for the World Championships of Warhammer World Championships. God, it's hard to say. In November 25, right? So that's a good progress point for us. Is that it's going to help people align those events going forward. So I think that's a positive, and I think that's going to help people sort of in their mind put more emphasis on the ITC because they're going to align it with that World Championships and they're going to go, yep, cool. And they might tune in and make more of an event of the World Championships, which is exactly what I think we want to be able to do and see. So that's awesome. The one potential, I guess, negative to this is that the ITC was always linked to LVO, and therefore it could potentially detract away a little bit from the importance of LVO on the global stage, because now essentially it's not the culmination of the ITC season, and therefore people might give it a little bit less importance. Although I will say I think that's pretty doubtful. LVO is a massive tournament. It has I think over 1,000 40k players as well as 100 and something players for Kill Team. I think it was 150 this year for Kill Team. It was a lot. It's one of the biggest global events for us in the community. So I'm almost certain that these things won't go away, and if anything, they're probably going to continue to grow. And when we come to talking about how the points are awarded for stuff, LVO is going to be a very, very significant event when it comes to ITC points, and it's still going to be a golden ticket event, which will mean that it's going to get that support, and I think it will only get bigger from here. My personal perspective, but I could see the potential that someone might go, well, you've taken away a bit of what that tournament was previously. Another thing they've announced in this article is that they're going to be essentially awarding more golden tickets to nations that don't necessarily have the representation from the golden ticket allocation they have. So if your national allocation hasn't been met, they'll award essentially tickets to ITC ranked players in your nation. So I don't know how many that's going to be. It doesn't necessarily say or articulate it in the article, but what I think this does mean is, let's say your nation only has one golden ticket event and they want to have more people from your nation attend, then they can potentially just issue more ITC based golden tickets to your nation to make sure that you get a better representation of players. This also means that if you're the player that seems to get second at every single event that you go to, you can still find yourself heading to the World Championships with a chance to be able to win, even though you didn't necessarily win the golden ticket event that you went to because someone else might have won it. So I think this is a broadly good change. I think generally more golden tickets is a good thing for the community. The way I see it is, I personally think the best thing about the World Championships is seeing all of the communities there and all the people there, and you want it to feel like a World Championships. You don't want it to feel like here's the big three metas just battling it out. You want it to feel like every single nation is being represented and have their sort of best players turn up, so it's a real sort of global event. So I think that's a pretty good change for that as well. I would like to see a bit more detail on how many more tickets that they'll hand out. Does they have a particular size event in mind? Are they trying to go to 128 players for Kill Team? Are they trying to go to 256? Or is it just going to be based on how many tickets that they're going through the year? I don't really know, because I assume venue size and all that sort of stuff is also going to drive it. But we've seen pretty consistent and exceptional growth for the Kill Team community going forwards between these events. So I'm expecting it to be just more growth going forward again. So seems like a good thing for me. So one of the things that they've changed is essentially how the points will be awarded. So smaller points will now get smaller tournaments will now get slightly more points. So before, broadly, they don't explain how the algorithm works, but it's kind of obvious when you see the points allocated per tournament. The larger the tournament you're in and the better you place within that tournament, the more points you get. But if you place first at a tournament with 256 players versus a tournament with 64 players, you clearly got significantly more points for winning the bigger tournament. Now, they've apparently reduced that gap so that the sweet spot of tournament size is going to be between 64 and 256. But for the majority of kill team tournaments, that's going to be around our sort of like GT size, which is pretty good. And it should mean that if you are consistently winning in a smaller community that might not necessarily be able to get the player numbers that a large community gets, you can still potentially have that representation and get sufficient points to then get you a golden ticket to then get you out, which is, I think, a really good change. But I will, again, just build on that slightly in a bit. The other key change that they've made is they've made it 6 events for individual players rather than 5 previously. So it used to take, for anyone who doesn't know how the ITC works, essentially it takes your top 5 events across the ITC season, your points allocated from them, and it gives you an overall score. Broadly, like if you were, scoring about 200 points for an event, which for a rough equation for people is if you came first at a 64 player event, you would get approximately 200 points, or maybe a little bit more than 200 points. If you did 5 events where you got first place with around 200 points at 64 player events, you were going to be in the top 3 for the ITC. So that's kind of what you're looking at. Now, however, it's going to be 6 events. So you have to do a little bit more work to be able to potentially do this. But that's for everyone, right? So like everyone has to be able to now get balanced on 6 events. So it's kind of trying to show you your consistency over events. So there's a few other bits just to note on that, which is kind of interesting for those who are potentially team players or particularly interested in their faction standings. So for a team event, for team ITC, it takes your top 10 events from your team, but that's clearly made of individual scores. Now, I'm pretty sure, can't confirm, but I'm pretty sure it only maxes out at 3 events per individual. So let's say you've got, in your team, you've got Ace, you've got Dan Barton, you've got Bart, you've got Mateusz, you've got, I don't know, I'm going to keep naming players, but like insert amazing players here, right? And they're all doing really well. Or you have one of those players in your team and they have these 10 events that they've all smashed at 200 points, where it's only going to count their top 3 scores. So you still need your other players in your team to score well as well, right? So you would need each of those players to take their top 3 results, not just one player's results. So even if you have got, your rat man of the world with 1,000 ITC points, even though you might have that, you would need his points would only be the top 3, so you get 600 from him, and the rest of your team would have to make up those remaining points. So you need, realistically, for a team to be viable for the ITC, you need a minimum of 4 players, and you need to have all put in at least 3 events where you're doing decent like scores. So if you can do that, you're probably in a good place. So for teams, top 10, go to 3 events, make sure you score well at 3 events, you'll probably be okay. For factions, it is only your top 5 events. So that's your breakdown. So for instance, I could play 5 games of Exaction Squad and I'll get a global ranking as Exaction Squad. Or maybe I get 5 games with Illicidian Star Striders and I'll get a global ranking of Star Striders. So if you're really interested in sort of spreading out your capability across factions, I would suggest, again, if you can get those sort of 5 wins with a faction or 5 solid placings, you can then switch to another faction and then move on from there. But if you only have 3 with a faction, you're probably not going to win that faction ranking, right? So it depends, I guess, what matters to you. If you want to show yourself as an expert in a particular team or field and you want the ITC to represent you as being that expert, then you're probably best off going after a specific faction, at least 5 tournaments to maximize your chances. Because realistically, if you don't go to 5 tournaments, you're going to be anywhere from 200 down points behind someone that's done that. So you'd have to have significantly better scores in those 4 events to catch someone who has 5 events, particularly with the new changes that are coming in. Additionally, they have changed a few of the ways that points are awarded. So what they've done is essentially, I think they kind of want to get more TOs on board with like the GW method and way of doing stuff, so they can, I assume, control it a bit more. So they've got three measures that you can use to increase your points per event. So this affects TOs from when you're setting up your event, what you should do to make sure you maximize ITC points for your players. But for players, it also kind of affects, what events you might want to go to if your game plan is to maximize your ITC points, right? So firstly, if the TO links their BCP account to their My Warhammer account, that's going to give their events a little bit of an ITC boost. That's pretty easy to do. Anyone can do that. They should be able to do that in seconds. It was very, very easy for me to do. The next one is to become an approved TO. There is a form that you can fill in to apply to become an approved TO. I'd highly recommend it for anyone that is interested in TOing or does TOing regularly. It's not a hard process, not arduous. You fill in a form, and then what they do is they make sure they send you updated rules and that sort of stuff ahead of events, particularly for like a big 40k player or a big 40k TO, I should say. If you become an approved TO, they'll send you the changes or the rule books that you need to be able to, on the day, inform your decisions, because otherwise you have to spend hundreds of pounds on rule books. We're not like that in Kill Team, because obviously our rules are free, but just for awareness, that's one of the perks that they give. So linking my Warhammer account, being an approved TO, and the final boost if it's a golden ticket event. So again, that is an application form you need to send to the World Events team, and then you just have to articulate why you think your event should be a golden ticket event. Broadly for Kill Team, if you've been running it consistently for a few years, it's going to be probably approved. If it's a large enough size event, it's probably going to be approved. And you can maximize your ITC points by doing that. So, for instance, not Kill Team, we have a TO that with a linked account, approved TO, and it's a golden ticket event. It's going to be like the optimal size. Same for Turning Point Tactics. Same for all the UKTC events as well going forward. So, broadly speaking, if you have a golden ticket event, I should say as well, King of the North is the same. If you have a golden ticket event, it's going to be all of those three things, and therefore it will net you the most ITC points. So if you are a competitive player that is like, I want to do the best on the leaderboards, I'm really interested in the rankings, then what you want to do is get on the rankings, is go to golden ticket events, and that will, of approximately 64 players or greater, and that will maximize your point scores. I think it kind of goes like linearly up to 256 players or so, or maybe not linearly, but I don't know how it works. But I think after that, there's probably diminishing returns. So for the Kill Team community, that's good, because there's not many, if any, events at 256 players or greater. Hopefully we get there one day. But it's going to hopefully mean that we see that maximum amount of growth in that 0 to 64 player base and 64 to 256 player base as well, which is awesome. So the one, I guess, critique of this that I have is this is like I like the idea of it, because it's essentially it's forcing importance when it comes to golden ticket events. It's going to make them more appealing for those competitive players that care about ITC and all those sorts of things as well. But the one like critique I have is, let's say you're in a nation that has significantly more golden tickets than another nation. Well, you now have significantly more points boosts on all of your events than other nations do. So I guess the examples that I would give is, let's take US. US has arguably the most amount of golden ticket events that there is, and they're all probably over 64 players. So they already had probably the largest number of large events. So they were already doing well for when it comes to the ITC, because they have the most amount of opportunity to do well. And arguably, the counter argument is a larger population to spread those points out over, but the argument is still there. And then you have, say, like Poland or Australia, who potentially have fewer golden ticket events and a smaller competitive scene, but obviously still just as good competitive players. We've seen that pretty much consistently throughout the World Championships now, that all the competitive scenes are equal, I would suggest. So a scene like that has fewer golden ticket events is also now going to have fewer ITC points being awarded to it, because if you don't have the golden ticket, you're not getting the boost that the golden ticket awards, and therefore you're not necessarily going to be able to get through and get those additional points. So I get why they've done it, and it is definitely sort of forcing people towards you need to get on board with the World Championships of Warhammer as being the pinnacle event that you want to go to. Therefore, the ITCs can be aligned, and therefore you want all your events to be aligned with that, with the golden tickets, the ITC, etc., etc., etc. So I think it's a good aspiration for where they're trying to go. But what I will say, and I think most people who have been to the World Championships, and this, by the way, is no slight on the effort of the individual TOs that turn up on the day or anything like that, but I think there is like the devil is in the detail when it comes to tournament organising. And I think some of those details are kind of missed when it comes to the World Championships. And it is small things, like they have a whole bunch of mats that they lay out for you to play on, but there's no deployment zones marked on them, there's no objective markers marked on them. So every single game you have to set up yourself, terrain gets moved, all that sort of stuff. And therefore, even though you have more time, it just kind of feels like it's not quite as premier an event as it potentially should be. That being said, they give you loads of free stuff, but it was branded with like US Open bits. So I kind of want them to just go, okay, yeah, like this is the one, this is what we're going to do. We are going to make it the best, event ever, and then just go with it. Like I'm all for them to, if they want it to go that way, to be successful. I really hope that we do see that. But they should also, as a very well doing company, earning many millions of pounds in profit, I think put in a bit more effort when it comes to those things. Because to be fair, it has got better in the iterations that I've seen, but just small things like making sure that the tables are correct, that the terrain is correct, and that the objective markers are laid out is like a really small win for a big company, and I think that's something that they should be able to do. So that's my personal opinion. So anyway, back to the point of the topic. If you want to maximise your chances on the ITC, going to golden ticket events is the best way to do it, particularly if they're over 64 players. Some of the bigger communities are going to have more opportunities to do that, but potentially that's an opportunity for you to travel to do that if you wanted to, and try and attend some of those ITC scoring events. And I, as someone who's now travelled a few times for Kill Team, I would highly recommend it. The community that I've met internationally is phenomenal, and I've had an amazing time every time I've gone anywhere and played Kill Team. There's a few more places that I want to go to play more Kill Team, and just to meet more of the community. But like when you go to the World Championships, you see so many people, and they're all awesome people, right? They are amazing people from across the world that you wouldn't normally ever get to see. And I've had the most amount of fun doing it, so I cannot recommend it enough if that's something that you are interested in doing. So there is. I guess as well, there's a few other bits. They've streamlined some processes for TOs. If you're a TO, you can read into it. Essentially, it's a token process getting streamlined. That's quite good. It saves us some admin, makes it a bit quicker for getting your tickets approved, which is good. And they've also stated that there'll be no paywall when it comes to access to the tournaments via BCP and the ITC. So that's good. There is a bit of a element of, if you want to be able to review your previous scores on BCP, you do have to be a subscriber, but you could just participate without paying that, although it's not a huge amount of money, should you wish to do so. So that being said, let's talk about some of the ways that you might be able to get involved and some of the tournaments that are coming up. This is at the moment from a UK perspective. However, I know that there's a whole bunch of international players that are going to be dying to put their links for their BCP in their events with as much information as you can. Put a date, put a location, put a BCP link in the comments below so people can find it, and we'll share it as widely as we can to make sure we get maximum attendance at these tournaments, particularly if you want me to attend. So last weekend I took my exaction out and I went to Sheffield at the Outpost, and played there, and I'll do a review of that tournament in the next couple of days because I think it'll be worth doing, and so the lessons I learned with exaction, which is pretty cool. Next weekend on the 1st and 2nd of March, you have the Manchester GT. That's being run by the UKTC. So again, that's an approved TO, that's a linked account, that's a golden ticket event, it's a 2-day event. So that will be really good for the ITC. 15th of March is the Lincoln Trios. That'll be a slightly more a smaller event, probably not one for the ITC, but it's probably going to be some of the most fun that you can imagine having at an event, because I love team events. They're always really good fun, and the Lincoln lot are like a great bunch to be around. So I think if that's a big success, you might see them pick up a few more of those. I know the guy organising it, Simon, he's a really good dude, and he's put a lot of thought into it, so I'm pretty excited to see how it goes. The 22nd of March is the Goonhammer tournament on at Leicester. I assume that is all of the three when it comes to the ITC, but I can't confirm that because I don't know myself. Then the 5th and 6th of April, the Sheffield GT. That's a 64-player GT hosted by UKTC, and run by Deck, the guy who ran the Sheffield tournament that I was just talking about previously. Really good dude, it'll be a really well run event. Again, because it's UKTC, it's going to be all three of those things and maximise your ITC points. The 19th of April is the Easter extravaganza, which is obviously being run by Notts Kill Team. So I have a little bit of personal bias there because I think they run some of the best events globally. And Squad Games not coming at you, don't worry. Everyone has their own preferences. I know that Walk 5 is probably also on that list, but I do think they do some of the best events, and I will back it. So if you don't have a bad time, I'm sure there's a money back guarantee you can get if you do have a bad time. Sorry. Anyway, that's the 19th of April. That's in Sutton Ashfield at Sanctuary. So that's where the next one will be. Again, all three for that. So big for the ITC points, 64 players. It's going to be huge. We have various skirmishes, but they're not too to talk about. So the 7th of June is the next one for the UKTC. That's the Bristol GT. So again, that's going to be all three of those things. So big points up for grabs. The 21st and 22nd of June is going to be the TPT Weekender. So that's going to be the 2-day event. I've got 3 golden tickets up for grabs for that event, so I'm hoping it's going to be a big one. I want to try and maximise what we can do for that event, so hopefully that's a really big one, but we'll see how it goes. But again, that's going to be in Sanctuary for Nottingham, and again that's hitting all three things. So I'm linked account, improved TO, and it's a golden ticket event, so it should be good for your ITC points as well. Hoping for 96 players, which might make it one of the biggest tournaments in the UK if we get everyone to turn up. It was last year, so we'll see. 5th of July is the Leeds Grand Tournament. So again, that's a UKTC event, so that should be pretty good. We then have in August the World Team Championship in Mechlin. Now I don't know, because what the WTC has 2 events to it. It has an individuals event and it has a team event. Now the team event is going to be hard for you to win much ITC points on. It's just the way it works out. I'm assuming the individual event, because it was a golden ticket event last year, will be exactly the same as it is this year, and therefore will be a golden ticket, approved TO, and all that sort of good links. I'm sure the guys organising it will comment below and correct me if I'm wrong on any of that. But it's usually a really big tournament with an international player base from across Europe, and we also got Aussie and US teams last year. I think if there's anyone else from further afield outside of Europe. Well, I think it was just Europeans and the Aussies and the US. I hope I haven't missed someone out. And it's a really good event. So I know that a lot of people are torn between, do I go to the World Championships of Warhammer or do I go to the World Team Championships? This year, I'm on holiday for the World Championships, so I'm not going to be able to go. So I'm really hoping, sort of doubling down, that I can make it to the World Team Championships, because that's going to be my equivalence. The next one, 6th to 9th of November is when we're expecting that World Championships to be. And then the 20th of December, we're having another non-golden ticket event in Nottingham for about 64 players for the Christmas Clash. Now there is going to be a whole bunch of other events that people are aware of where you can maximise your ITC points. These are only the ones that I'm tracking for the UK. So do me a favour and do your community a favour. Chuck them in the comments below, and we can try and share them as wide and far as possible, because we want to maximise attendance at the end of the day. I want every single event to essentially be 64 players, so we can get the most amount of events on the ITC. Everyone get their 6 events done with the 5 in their faction, whatever, and then we have a really representative ITC. That's what I'd like to see, and hopefully that will mean that we get more people represented at the World Championships, and that means that we get to interact with more awesome people. And going forwards, that's my priority is going to be. It's going to be about engaging with humans and trying to make sure that I spend as much time rolling dice, having fun, and laughing as much as I can with people that I want to be around. So let's try and make that happen. Let's try and advertise as much as we can, because the competitive community in this community is phenomenal. And I think more people need to experience it, because once they do, they'll love it, no doubt. All right, that is it for me. But as always, if you have any questions, comments or feedback, drop a comment below, and we'll get right to you. And please advertise your events so we can make sure that more people attend in future. Take it easy. See ya. That brings us to the end of the episode. Hopefully you found something new or useful while listening, and if you did, throwing us a like would be greatly appreciated. If you want to make sure you don't miss any episodes, make sure you hit that subscribe button and click on the bell so you get notifications as soon as the next one drops. It really is the best way to help a small channel like ours. And if you can't wait and you do want early access,
we have a Patreon where you can get exclusive access to all our content ahead of time. As always, we'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback. Just drop a comment below and we'll get right to you. Thank you so much for listening. I'm your host Ryan, this has been Turning Point Tactics, and we'll see you next week.